are some examples of milestones for men and women in recovery from sexual addiction or unwanted sexual behaviors? What do those look like?
To piggyback off a little bit of what Nick was saying, yes, it is important to understand, physiologically what happens to our bodies. Like he was saying, even like with the alcohol situation of, we don't want to just count days. So that balance of, there are like physiological things that happen after week 1, week 2, week 3, week in our bodies when we're giving up something we've been addicted to. And that's why we show brain scans and things like that. And so that's good to be aware, but have the mentality of, instead of I'm counting, maybe you're counting down days because you're quitting something for a while, or you're counting up days, just really shifting your mind to, I want to live as healthy and in touch as I can right now and for forever. And so milestones, I think, that are really good are things that focus around that, like recognizing, yes, after so many days, things get easier. And for milestones, we want it to be things like, do I instantly reach for the phone now when I'm triggered rather than going to isolate? Am I sharing honestly and quickly? Like a huge milestone is if you've hidden and, lied and manipulated over your addiction for years, when you relapse or stumble, do you automatically pick up and call your group? And do you tell your spouse, quickly? Do you get your recovery action plan out? That's a big victory. I mean, I would say as a leader of betrayed spouses, that's probably the number one thing that spouses look for and celebrate, is that my husband in my group, my husband told me right away. That is what they're looking for, is that honesty. Actively engaging in recovery. So yeah, not just having a number, but if you're just detoxing, which is like phase 1, you get all the alcohol out of the house, but then phase 2 has to be getting to the root of why we go for those things in the first place. And so you can't simply just stop looking at porn or acting out. You have to be engaging in recovery. And so when I see my husband doing that, or even myself, that I'm, we get lazy sometimes, even I do. And so when I'm in a season of working hard and engaging my recovery, and either in a group or leading a group, I know that I'm doing well for myself. Being mentally present is a huge one. I didn't realize that John wasn't very mentally present for the first 4 years of our marriage until I experienced it. And I'm like, this is what it looks like when you're like looking at me and listening completely. And I can tell, like, and it's one of the biggest tells is like, why are your eyes glassed over? Like, why are you literally walking out of the room when I'm mid-sentence? And I do know I talk a lot, so some of that's on me. And then just self-awareness, being able to say, instead of being like, the kids are stressing me out, I just need to leave and get some time. That was kind of an old response for us, for me and for John, when we were very addicty. But people be able to say, like, I'm feeling exhausted, or I'm feeling pressure because of work, or I've let go of my routine, so now things are building up and I think I need to like sit down and figure out what I need. That kind of language to me was showing me that things were changing. And then the last couple that I can think of are that you see your relationships are increasing with God and with others. You're not spending so much time isolating, and that you're actually escaping before the trigger takes over. And so I would say sharing honestly and seeing John or myself like be able to use the tools like the escape plan or see things coming and make adjustments ahead of time are probably like my very favorite things about recovery, is that really clear self-awareness, and then the follow through to use the tools that we've learned.
Yeah, I know for my wife and I, we still look at our marriage and refer to it often as before pure desire and after pure desire. And there is kind of a marking of how long has that been. And it's not necessarily about tracking any one thing, but just a way to remember we do marriage differently now. And sometimes to speak into that and say, that's our old way. That's what we used to do. That's before we were aware of a lot of these things. And those are the unhealthy habits we're moving away from. This is how we do it now. And so I think reminding yourself of that by just marking, this is a point in time we decided we're going to make change. I decided I'm going to make change. And whether you've been without relapse in that whole time or not, I think you can still mark it's been X number of months or years since we've started this journey and we're still on it and God's still at work. So I think that's a helpful one. I mean, we've already talked about sobriety. I think it is good to just track as a way to encourage yourself. Hey, I did it for 60 days. Why can't I go 61 and 65? And so that's useful. I think for some guys, it's how much time they've spent in group or helping lead groups that becomes significant to say, man, look how God is beginning to use my story. It's now been 3 years of helping other men, or some who have tracked. It's been, I've helped 18 men in my groups on this same journey. So God has taken my one story and multiplied it 18 times over. I think that's a milestone that we can mark. I already mentioned things like relationship health, of being able to celebrate we were able to have a disagreement and work through it and identify our emotional reactions and share those and not go to that old unhealthy place. So I think that's the kind of milestones we could celebrate. And just the time that we've been able to go without some of those old unhealthy coping mechanisms like video gaming or social media or going to certain parts of town or just the kind of stores that were a part of our pattern, and being able to just look and see, you know what, my life is just as good without those things. I haven't needed them in my life. And I think taking courage to keep moving forward. And then that can give us some wisdom. If there are activities we look at some point bringing back into our life, we can kind of reflect on the time without them and determine, is this really something I want to pick back up? Because some of those things that we miss early on and we start to count, man, it's been X number of days since I've been on, that social media site. Then a person gets to several months or a year down the road and they look at it and go, you know what? I don't miss it anymore. I don't want to go back to where I was always engaged in that and checking every day and facing possible triggers. So I think just marking those things as well can be a useful part of the process.
Yeah. And to go back to, I think something you said at the beginning, Nick, is that a milestone is evidence of growth. It's evidence of direction that has been taken. And so it can be so flexible to where you are in your journey, like what you've been through. I think for me, it's like identifying bad habits. Like the fact that I'm able to say, oh, doing that is not helpful for me. It's not helpful for my relationship. That in and of itself can be a milestone. Habits that you do create can totally be it. And this is something I encourage my group members too. Like when they're triggered by something and they reach out, that is a milestone to be celebrated. Because before, when you were triggered, you had no idea, don't have any idea why I'm going down the faster scale. I don't even know what the faster scale is. Like now the fact that you can do that is a healthy thing. And so I think what I would say to this question is like, we can give you examples until we're blue in the face. But this is going to be customizable to you and your journey, and you can make a milestone out of anything as long as you know it's something that's reminding you of the direction and growth you've taken.
Yeah. And can I say too, like, I'm going to do a shameless plug for groups, but this is why group is so important for a couple reasons, because we can be so stuck in our pain that sometimes it does take a friend, and not to minimize or like downplay our pain, but sometimes when a friend says, it's amazing that he told you because he's never told you before, or they point out something that's growth, that's change, and that's different, or you go through group the second time, or you go through as a co-leader the second time and you're looking at your answers from the year before when you first went through and you were hurting so badly. Like when I look at my journals, I am like, I cannot even believe I was that bad. It doesn't even seem like it's the same person anymore. And that's happened every year of like, oh, that's where I was last year. And like you're saying, Nick, a lot of times it's not numbers. It's like, I was really struggling with anger last year. I was really struggling with sexual intimacy because of the betrayal. And it's amazing to see how different things are, and we forget. And I think that's why we hear over and over from, people that came far before us, that it's so good to write things down and to write praise reports down and to write our struggles down, because we will look back at those and see how far God has taken us through those things.